So now that we've cleaned up our page, we've coded our header, now it's time to build the intro screen. And so this part is the intro screen. It's basically a full page thing with a background with some text on it. As you can see, it takes up the entire height of the screen. And to do that, we're going to use viewport sizes. I have this post here, this one that explains viewport units. And to make that, we're going to tackle three things. We're going to tackle the height of our section, so it's always going to fill our screen. And that means it's going to depend on the height of our viewport. We're also going to make the font size responsive so that resizing it is also going to change the font size. And finally, our background image here is going to cover the entire size of this section. So remember that when I say viewport, I mean window on the desktop, but smartphones don't really have windows. Again, look at this post for some more information on viewport sizes. First, let's start with the HTML code. After our header, we're going to write a section tag to group all the elements of the intro together. So we're going to have a section with the class of intro. We can do this two ways actually. We can just write section, press tab, that works fine. But because we know that we are needing an intro tag, remember from CSS that we can write a dot to mean class. So here we can write section dot intro, type tab, and now we immediately get a section with the class of intro. So that's really convenient. Inside of this section, there's going to be this text, but we'll tackle this later. We'll first focus on the background. Note that we don't really add an image here. Not in the HTML code. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use CSS to basically define the background image like we do a background color. So after this information about the header, we're going to write a section.intro tag, just as the same as we did right there when we did the autocomplete thing. So this is a double selector, or it selects two things at the same time. It expects a section tag with a class of intro. So only when these two conditions are met will this selector match and will this block be used. So we'll set the height first using view height. So our total height of our block here is 100 VH, view height, viewport height. And then, so we can save this, go to our document. We don't really see anything because, first off, nothing is loading. Oh, there we go. So that's our section. We see that it's here, but we don't really see anything, right? We could try just using background color red, and that gives you an indication of how big it's going to be, right? We don't want the background color, we want the background image. And to have a full page background image, I've used this post, also from CSS Tricks, a ton of times if I want to make a full page background image. And that sort of goes through the whole thing. And that's basically the approach that we're going to use. First, I'm going to show you what a background image looks like if we don't specify any of these things. So what happens if we just say a background image? And you don't have to type this. I've prepared a background image that's on a server somewhere. And it's a really small one. So it's an image of a cat with a width of 100 pixels. So it's a really small image. And so what happens here is that this image repeats. And this was fine back in the 90s when the screens were small and loading an image took a couple of hours. Now images can be much bigger, much faster, so this repeat is not very useful for us. But it's just to show you what happens if you're using a small image. Now let's try it with our real image. And the first question that we have to ask is, how do we link into our real image? Where is it actually? Well, in our image folder we have this background.jpg. This is the image that we want to load, right? Now, we know that this image is in a folder called img for image. However, our CSS file is here in this CSS folder and we can't directly access it. The reason why is that the file name for the image, if we refer to it, is relative to the CSS file, not the HTML file. So if we would write a link to image here, it would look for an image folder inside of the CSS folder, which is not what we want. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to use this dot dot notation to indicate that we want to go a level up in the hierarchy. So this dot dot means look in the enclosing folder, the parent folder, for a certain file or directory. So in our case, the parent folder of the CSS folder is the folder of our project. It's the same folder our index.html file is in. So if we do type / here, you will see that we get completion of CSS, image, and index.html. Our background image is not in this folder. Instead, it's in the image folder. So we write image, or we just select it and press enter, img / and then background.jpg. And again, we let our autocomplete help us here. And then we can save, and we would see our background image. Cool. So then we'll set a couple of parameters. And again, these come from this blog post here, only I've made them a bit more explicit so that you can see. So the first thing is, as I said before, that we never want our background to repeat. So we're going to set our background to repeat to no repeat, right? Note in general that this is not an issue if you use big images like this, but still we want to include it. Then, and this is the core one, we want our image to cover the entire section, which means that we want it to fit on any kind of screen, regardless of whether the screen is really wide or really tall. Of course, that means that sometimes the image will shrink down, or it will crop off parts of the image, but yeah, that's a conclusion we have to do. So the core rule here is to set the background size to cover, basically fill up the entire thing. See, it becomes a bit smaller, and now if we resize it like this, well, nothing happens yet. But that's what brings us to the next line, which is to indicate how our image is going to be positioned. So if we resize here or here, you can see that our it sort of resizes, but it always sticks to this top left corner. That's the sticky one. And we want this to scale out from the center. To do that, we're going to write background position center. Right, and now if we scale this image here, you see that it scales like this and it scales like this. And finally, we will set our background not to scroll when our page scrolls. So now it scrolls as you expect. You can leave this off if you think it's weird, but I just want to show you. So if you have background attachment set to fixed, then what happens is this image will stay fixed here. So if we scroll now, the image stays there. And this is cool if we have this next part of the gallery here. So cool, we have a perfect background image. It fills the viewport no matter what, and we're done for this tutorial.